Sure.
Okay.
Is that working? Hi, can you hear me? My name is Niamh O'Mahony. I am a former director and a former board member of Cork City Football Club. If most of you are going, who? We play in the League of Ireland, just across the water. We play a Premier Division, and we actually have owned our club entirely since 2010, when financial problems meant the Supporters Trust, Forus, Friends of the Rebel Army Society, were granted a licence to play in the League of Ireland, and the club at the time, Cork City FC, actually were not given a licence to play. We had 9 days to put a football club together. We went to our first game with 13 players. 2 of those were goalkeepers and 1 was injured, and we got a 1-1 draw. So we were pretty happy with that. Yeah. That first season, there was 4 women on our board out of 10, and when we look back at that, it's a pretty unique situation. I was one of those 4. You know, and there's now currently 1 very capable lady on the board, but we don't really see where the next generation is going to come from. I'm pretty sure I'll be press ganged going back on at some stage, but my interest always was with the community effort, that the collective idea that people could come together and make a success of a football club, because from the very beginning we were told we wouldn't succeed in Cork City, that there was no way supporters could run their football club. And you know, that first season was about getting to the end of the season and paying our bills, and we made it. We were promoted back into the Premier Division at the end of the 2011 season. And I had the chance then, because of the situation in Irish football, and because, you know, there's more supporters travel across the water and come to watch English league clubs play every single week than supports the League of Ireland games. And you know, Irish football was in a bad place, and because of what happened in Cork, we started getting calls from other football clubs and other supporters trusts going, what did you do? How did you manage to do it? Please help. So for the past 2 years, I've also project managed a European Commission project, which was to encourage community ownership and supporter involvement in football, and that was with Supporters Direct. So, you know, it's been a massive experience. FC United are people that we look at, and we actually look at what this club is doing here. It's an inspiration for us, and the beauty of it is actually just coming to the game here today, talking to your board members, seeing how you guys do things day to day. So that's pretty much where I'm coming from. My own personal experience. Irish sport, the first team sport I was able to play as a girl was actually in secondary school at the age of 14. There was no such thing as organised team sports before that. You either played with the boys and you didn't play league matches because you were a girl, or you did taekwondo, a martial art. And as a result, myself and my 4 cousins, we have 2 red belts and 2 black belts between us. So be careful.
I can't beat that. I just can't beat that at all. My name is Barbara Keeley. I'm an MP in Salford, and I have for the last 18 months chaired an all-party group on women's sport and fitness with the wonderful Tanni Gray-Thompson, the Paralympic athlete who's now in the House of Lords. What we try to do is keep raising in Parliament, keep raising in public, keep raising in social media, all the issues and barriers that are stopping girls and women taking part in sport. So that's what we do. Just an example, in the last year we had, there was quite a push last year, now that rugby's on today and the Six Nations, for the women to drop out of the Six Nations, because the Women's Six Nations runs in parallel with the men's. And in fact, through a social media campaign and writing letters to all of the nations involved, we actually persuaded them to keep the women in the Six Nations competition. So there have been some successes so far, but our main aim is to raise the profile of women in sport, to try and think of all of the policy issues that stop girls and women getting involved in sport, and to do something about that. I am so impressed by FC United's support for their women's team, and support for women's football, and support for women in sport. So I've wanted to come before when you've had these events near International Women's Day, but I'm so pleased to be here today. I can't match the taekwondo, but I am an average to slow runner. I managed to do a 10k over in Heaton Park, Manchester a couple of weekends ago, and that's my own participation.
Hi, I'm SHELLEY Alexander, and I'm the editorial lead for women's sport at the BBC.
And that's a role that's really only been going about a year. And it came about because, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do remember, London 2012, the Olympics and the Paralympics, how fantastic the women were. You're talking about Nicola Adams and Jade Jones and Catherine Granger and all those marvellous performances, and Hannah Cockcroft in the Paralympics. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that that momentum behind the women's sport continued. We've always done a lot of women's sport. We do about 1,000 hours of live women's sport a year, but what we found was that we weren't connecting it with our online, with our radio, with our sports news. So my job is to make sure that in between those big events, that we get the sportswomen up to Media City, and we get them onto lots of different outlets like BBC Breakfast and 5 Live and Radio 2 and the Today programme, so that we can get them out there and that people start to really care about these sportswomen who are doing fantastic things and care about them in the way that we cared about them during the Olympics and the Paralympics. So that's my job, really, and a big part of it is growing women's football. Kelly Simmons, who's head of the national game and women's football, came to Media City in November of 2012 when we signed a deal to show World Cup qualifiers, England World Cup qualifiers, BBC Alba show Scotland World Cup qualifiers, also the Women's FA Cup final live, and to do a new programme called the Women's Football Show, which starts in a couple of weeks on BBC 3 at 7 o'clock, which is much better than its post-news night BBC 2 slot we had last year. And Kelly said this is a watershed moment for women's football, because on the day that we signed the deal to do some live football with England, they got 2 big sponsors coming in, Vauxhall and Continental Tires. And that's really important in terms of that virtuous circle of great performance, media, sponsorship. And so that was a key moment, I think, and something that is really important to carry on doing. My experience, well, before this job, I was actually the programme editor of Football Focus, and I'd like to think that for 5 years I did that job. No one noticed that I was a woman, and I hope you didn't. But I can remember when I first got that job, because I was the only woman on the shortlist, as I often have been, and it was it was a surprise to me. And I remember I was in the gym and Garth Crooks was on the running machine beside me, and I didn't know him really well, but he sort of looked at me and said, "Oh, congratulations on getting the Football Focus job." And I said to him, "Well, to be honest, Garth, I'm still in a bit of shock." And he said, "Not as much as we are." But I have to say, I never had any problem at all. The crew were really terrific. My first memory of watching a football match on telly, I was 9, and I was jumping up and down behind the sofa, willing Sunderland to hang on in the FA Cup final and beat Dirty Leeds. Although at 9, I don't know quite if I was saying Dirty Leeds, and apologies if there's any Leeds fans here. And it's really interesting because I read in the Observer on Sunday a really moving piece of work about saving the grassroots, saving the soul of football by a Hillsborough survivor, and it was a really, really moving piece. But there was one bit that I really took issue with. He talked about how going to the match, loving football, being passionate was the rite of passage for every young boy. But what about us? It was my rite of passage too, and I loved the game. But actually he did help me out, because he mentioned that his first memory was the 76 Cup final, which Southampton won. And I was having a conversation with someone at work the other day, and he was saying, of course, guys are more geeky than girls. They're real anoraks because they know everything and they remember everything. And I was going, yeah, that's true. And he said, like, for example, who won the 1976 Cup final? And I went, Southampton. And of course, that was a complete con, because I just read it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jane Sims, and I'm a football referee and have been a football referee for 10 years. Recently refereed here at FC United 3 weeks ago against Ilkeston. I'm also a FIFA assistant referee, so I have the opportunity to travel around UEFA and potentially the world with FIFA. I got involved in football as my father was a referee, and there weren't girls' teams like there are now that I played in when I was younger. So the way for me to be involved in football was to progress through refereeing. And for me, week in, week out, apart from this weekend when I've no game, the best seat in the house is in the centre of the pitch for me. And it's a real privilege to be involved and to represent the Football Association week in, week out in football. I'm also an FA ambassador, so yesterday I spent the day at York College in partnership with North Riding FA and the college to encourage more females to participate in football. So we worked with primary school children in the morning, coaching them for 20 minutes on some basic principles of refereeing, and the children move around and had a go at coaching, and they worked with some women's Super League players from the North East. And during the afternoon we worked with the senior school children, so we were encouraging them and trying to broaden their horizons to opportunities within football besides playing. So that's a role that there are several ambassadors around the country, but that's a role that we take fairly seriously in encouraging participation, whether that be playing or hopefully future referees. So I'm been very successful in the 10 years since I started refereeing, and last year I had the biggest honour of refereeing the Women's FA Cup final played in Doncaster, broadcast for the first time on the BBC. So I had several thousand in the stadium, but I also was aware that I had a larger audience of around 1 million people at home, so there was a big duty for me to go out there, enjoy the game, referee to the best of my ability, stay low profile and hope the game went very well, which it did. So thank you very much.
Wow, well, how do I follow that? I'm glad I don't have to. I guess my job is just to try and get the best out of the speakers that we have here and to enable you to get your questions to them. I'm going to start off with a question I particularly want us to have a discussion about. And this is following on from the film that we premiered last night and also just showed over the Road of Falcons. And this was to do with a recent statement by the Sports Minister, Helen Grant, who, somewhat controversially, in a lot of opinion, recently came out with a statement that women should be radiant whilst partaking in feminine sports such as ballet and gymnastics and cheerleading and even roller skating. And I can see some jaws trying there. So I'm interested really as a starter to get views from the panel on that, how constructive a comment that might have been, whether there was perhaps a downside to it, the perception, the message that that gives to women who are here and playing in the sport, and also to the young girls who are coming through that we're trying to be role models to get into sport for health and fitness and all the benefits of sport. So who's going to start us off on the panel with that one? Barbara?
Yeah, it's obvious to ask the MP, isn't it? Is this working okay?
It is. I'll be a bit quite close.
Okay. Helen Grant is the first woman sports minister, and that's really important. And she's also the Minister for Women and Equalities. So that's a really powerful combination. I thought it was a pity she said what she said, because I don't think the important thing is to get women and girls worrying about how they look. I think women and girls already worry enough about how they look most of the time. The important thing is that they understand and want to take part in fitness activities or sport. And, you know, I said that I was a sort of average to poor runner. I have to say that the 10K I did that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I ended up very red-faced and really rather sweaty and a bit of a mess at the end of it. So I think that's a barrier we have to overcome with girls. And I think it's much more important that girls understand that if they want to look good, if they want to feel good and they want to enjoy themselves, that's more important than anything else, and that you can always go and do the makeup and the hair later, but the taking part is the more important thing. I think what Helen was trying to do, I understand, is to say there should be a choice. And there should be a choice, because we know that not all girls love football, although clearly people do here. Not all girls want to take part in team sports, and there should be other choices for them. But I think we don't want to be mentioning, sequin socks and looking gorgeous. I think that's the last thing we should ever say to girls.
Obviously, I'm not as familiar, I guess, with the sports minister's comments, but I have to say, when I read them, I just couldn't believe that a sports minister would say them myself. I mean, personally speaking, in Cork, we have a national football league, a national women's football league for the past 2 seasons, and I think the importance of it struck home to me when one of our, we had, it's affiliated to Cork City FC, it's not actually formally part of our club at the moment. But we had a group of schoolgirls in being ball person, and one of them actually went up to the players and said, "I can't believe I can play football when I'm grown up." And for me, that was wonderful that she just realised that she could do that, but it was also really sad because that was the first, you know, it's only 2 years old, it's brand new, it's still in its infancy, there's an awful lot of work to do, and yet that's what we're not saying to our young girls, that actually, you know what, the benefits that we talk about, we do an awful lot of, you know, in Cork, unfortunately, around the issue of suicides. There's a problem in our city with it, and we try to encourage our players to go out and talk about the importance of eating well, talking to your mates, being active and playing sport, and there's no reason why those exact things are not as relevant to young girls today. So, you know, it is about choice. It is great that people can choose, but it also is about the fact that I went to an all-girls secondary school once I did my junior cert, which I think is GCSEs, about 15. PE wasn't important anymore, it wasn't available, you were even encouraged to just focus on your studies and not sport, and that was the age that my friends started dropping out and stopped being active. I'm kind of considered a bit of a freak because I'm involved at a football club at the age of 31, and yet I'm going, guys, you don't know what you're missing out on, and there isn't just enough talking about the positives. This isn't about women, you know, it's just about opening their eyes and actually making them realise about what sport is about, in my view.
I actually I sit on a panel, community fund, where we look at really hard-hitting social inclusion projects, like using football to help people who have mental health problems and disability sport, and trying to stop gangs in Birmingham, you know, getting kids off the street so they won't go into gangs. And about 5 years ago, a project came to us where they looked at girls in Derby, 11 to 16-year-old girls in Derby, and they found out that hardly any of them were doing any activity at all. So the project was that they came to us with a pilot, and they'd asked the girls, what do you want to do? And they said they wanted to do street dance, and they wanted fitness and beauty days. So the project had teamed up with Nike and with Boots. And so, of course, you can imagine, I'm the only woman on this panel. Gordon Taylor, the PFA chair, chief exec, he's on there. And there's Bill Bush from the Premier League and various other people. And of course, you can imagine they were saying, what has this got to do with football? And why should football put their money into this project? And I really argued strongly that you have to reach out to these young girls who don't think sport is for them, who don't think that getting sweaty is a good thing, who want to do sport with their makeup on. And the other sport, sorry, I should have said they wanted to do trampolining as well. So they wanted to do street dance, trampolining, and have sort of makeup lessons and things. And why not? So I managed to persuade all the guys to back this, and it's turned into, it was called The Movement, and it turned into a fabulous pan-Derby city-wide initiative that's now been funded by the council, because it's got so many girls into doing activity, and a percentage of those girls are now playing football, are now playing rugby and cricket. And that's, so I think that's the key here. And I was really gratified to hear there's a fabulous project called Us Girls, which goes into disadvantaged areas to get 60 to 25-year-old women into sport. And that's run by Street Games, which some of you may have heard of, a terrific charity. And when they told me that they modelled what they do on the movement that I sort of, you know, fought for all those years ago, it made me really smile, because, as I say, you've got to reach out to those girls. Some girls don't want to do any sport at all, but roller derby. And roller derby, you can make up a name for yourself, and you can wear sort of anything you want. You can wear sort of lightning flashes on your cheeks and go around, and, you know, it's really, you get sweaty, you get hot, you're exercising, but a girl's having a lot of laughs. So, you know, I think we're right, it's all about choice. And sometimes through movement and dance, you can then go into what we would call sport proper.
Great, thank you very much. And that gets us going on a slightly controversial topic, but one that's causing a lot of discussion at the moment, and we've very much tried to make it the theme of our event this weekend. I'm going to throw the mic open to the floor now, so I'm looking for questions that people want to put to the panel. So who's got a question they want to ask? Going to go first. Kirsty, have you got a question? Because that's what comes with being the captain. No? Alison's got a question. Thank you, Alison. I'm going to pick on Jane.
received in the last round. Jane, you refereed one of our games a few weeks ago, as you said. You refereed it excellently, you were extremely in control of the game. The only other female referee that we've had refereeing FC United game in the last 8 to 9 years had a very poor game. I don't think either of those events, your excellent game or her very poor game, had anything to do with your chromosomes. In other words, whether you were female or male. But unfortunately, on both occasions, a lot of social media was, she was used because she was female, and how wonderful, the game was so good, and she's female. How does that make you feel?
Hi Alison, thank you for the question. I think for me it doesn't make a difference whether I'm female or male. Obviously I'm female. I want to be judged. I want to be judged as a referee. So as soon as the kick goes on, that's how I wish to be judged. And again, I can have a bad game as quite as easily as I can have a good game. We are assessed independently every game, and the assessors and clubs, I hope, look at us just as referees, regardless of our gender. And I think that's something that's improved over the years. As more and more females have become involved and are encouraged to get involved with the game. Right. Thank you. You can see I'm not used to comparing. I'd rather have a whistle than a microphone. So for me, although it's very pleasing to see the comments, obviously we are aware that there are negative comments as well. I'd just like to be judged as a referee and not as a female referee.
Great question from Alison there, thanks. Who else has got a question for the panel, please? Yeah, Sue?
Why do you think that women's sports in the UK has been so much slower to take off than places like the US or Australia? What is it about the UK that seems to make young girls so reluctant to get involved? And so that's anyone who wants to answer it, really.
Who fancies that one?
I'll stop.
Barbara?
As I understand it, you've got an entirely different system for funding sport in the US, in that the funding for sport for young people is equal. So the same amount of money in the United States goes into girls and women's sport as goes into men's sport. That doesn't happen in this country at all. So, you know, right from an early stage, I mean, the reason I think that women's football is so different in the United States and so many of our players have gone to play there is because they take it seriously. I was talking to somebody who said that she walked into Times Square, looked up at one of those famous advertising sites, and it was 3 women from the US national women's team in an advert for Nike. You know, you wouldn't see that in one of the prime advertising sites yet in this country. So there isn't the funding for girls and women's sport. There isn't the sponsorship for women. It's a struggle, you know, for even our top athletes. You know, it's only people like Jessica Ennis-Hill and people at the absolute top of their game that start getting into some decent amount of sponsorship. So one of the things that we're trying to really work on in Parliament and trying to really get ministers to get is that you won't get equality in terms of participation and results until you start putting the same sort of money so that it can be taken seriously. Our national England women's football team is on a contract of £20,000 a year. We've got male footballers who are paid that per day. So, you know, I just think that's the reason. We've got to start to do that. And I think one of the ways that we'll try and do the work in Parliament this year is try to work on sponsors and try to work on the media. What the BBC are doing is really important to that. The more we see women's sport, the more people might be prepared to sponsor it and to fund it.
Yeah. I think football particularly has got this... does everyone know the story of the Dick Kerr ladies, the Preston team, who were playing St Helens ladies on Boxing Day 1920 at Goodison Park? 53,000 people watched that match. It was a charity match. On the same day, I think Burnley were playing Blackburn, and only about 30,000 went. So the FA got really cross and decided that they would ban women from playing on any FA-affiliated ground. And that ban lasted 50 years. And in fact, last night I was at the Etihad. We had a women in football evening, and there was a lady there called Patricia Gregory, and she was one of the first people to get women's football going again in the 60s. And she was a Tottenham fan, and she was, they'd won the Fairs Cup, and I think Danny Blanchflower was holding up the cup on the bus, and she suddenly thought, why don't women play football? So she wrote a letter to the paper, and she got all these letters back from young women saying, oh, I'll join your team. Well, she didn't have a team. So she started a football team, and that basically started the bandwagon that got the ban overturned. So all those years, there was all these negative connotations about women playing football, but not just football, athletics as well. All these doctors who would say, oh, it's not very good for the woman's chest, and things like that. You know, it was remarkable what sort of went on. So I think in the States and in places like Sweden and Germany, it's all gender-neutral sport. But we've had this terrible history of not being allowed to play sport for all these different reasons. So I think that's, you know, we're playing catch-up now. And I think it is remarkable. I mean, I don't know what you think, but just in the last year, how much, you know, women's football has come on. It's great, and I think it's going to do even better.
I can It's probably slightly different, but there's a huge discussion going on in Ireland at the moment about women's sport and the coverage that it's getting. And a lot of the debate is around, well, you need the interest before you can get the coverage, but you do need the coverage to build the interest. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. But there's one very good example of, I don't know if you heard of her, there's a wonderful player called Stephanie Roach, plays for Piedmont. She scored an absolutely cracking goal a couple of months ago, and it went viral. It went to the States, it went to the US, or the UK, like you with the likes of, I think Gary Lineker was retweeting it on all these guys. And the general feeling around Ireland was like, oh my God, there's women that play football and they're quite good. And you're kind of going, lads, this goes on every week. They play week in, week out, and these players are that good week in, week out. We're particularly blessed in Cork. We have a wonderful player called Denise O'Sullivan. She's playing with Glasgow actually in the Champions League at the moment. And one of the comments that I heard about Denise is, Jesus, like you'd say she's a good player and it's not the fact she's a woman, you know, and this sort of commentary that comes on. But one of the things that did happen this year was we play, our first match of the season was actually last week. We play March to October. And this year they lined the FAI Cup, which would be our senior cup, and they had the Women's National League Cup on beforehand, and they showed both games as a double header live on television. And it was a really strong, like it was a really progressive development, considering that it was only in the last couple of years that they've showed Gaelic ladies football and camogie finals on television. Our ladies team won the Grand Slam last year in rugby. I think they didn't have a single game shown live on air. This time they've shown some of the games live online, which is progression, but again it's really slowly, and it goes back to that discussion. You know, when the interest is there, we'll give it the coverage, but you need the coverage to build the interest. And you know, the solution is, oh, use social media, and you're going, come on lads, we do, women's sport needs a little bit of a leg up to get going, and it'll look after itself after that. I'm convinced of that.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time and the fact that I promised to wrap up after about 30 minutes, but I'm also conscious that it's a really interesting discussion, so if there is one more burning question that somebody wants to wave at me, and if you're happy to take one more, then we can do. But after that, hands up. After that, it's Saturday at 3 o'clock in FC United play football on Saturday at 3 o'clock, so we will have to wrap up. Any more questions, please, from the floor? Yes?
How can we get the FA to recognise the girls more at grassroots? Last year the girls played in the league final, got 500 people there. In the semi-final of the FA Cup for women only got 500 people there, but nobody mentioned FC's 500 crowd with the FA. How do we encourage the FA to actually respond more to the girls at grass level?
I said make it a good question, and he did. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah.
You don't have an FA spokesman here.
Well, I can...
Shelley would like to comment.
Okay. The FA have just formed an inclusion advisory board, which Heather Rabatz, who sits on the main board, chairs, and I was lucky enough to get onto that board. And we've only met once, but I've really pushed forward, you know, the whole gender story. and we're going to have a subcommittee. So I'm going to raise that point. We're meeting at the end of this month at Wembley, and I'll raise that point because, you know, that's tremendous. 500 people. It's remarkable. Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think we've got a lad at work who left university 8 years ago, and he decided that women's football was on the up, and he would learn everything about it. And he does now, but I'm going to ask him if he knows about this because, you know, I think it's really important that people who are really interested, it's a growing sport, and we need to get the message of how fantastic the grassroots is out there. So I will raise it for you.
Just to add, I think that I think it's important what we're trying to do in Parliament. I mean, people don't always think that MPs and peers can make a lot of difference, but the FA had its centenary celebrations, and they had an event in Parliament, but a lot of it was about men's football, and actually we were quite critical of that. A lot of women turned up that weren't very happy, in that the emphasis on the night was all about men's football, and very little said and very little coverage. I think the FA is working hard to change things, but it's got a long way to go, I would say. That would be our assessment. It's one of those institutions around sport, and there are lots of others that have got a long way to go. Only the numbers of women on sports governing bodies is very small, and in the FA it's one of the worst. But it isn't the worst, because there are sports which have no women on their governing bodies at all. And of course, sport isn't going to be designed for girls and women to take part in if they don't even have anybody on their boards governing the sport that are women and that know anything about it. So that's got to change. So one of the things that's really been important is to try to get those sports governing bodies, those really important organisations like the FA, to take on board the fact that women and girls want to do sport, that you've got fantastic examples like you've just quoted, and that they should take notice. But, you know, it's a long haul, really, like everything else we're doing.
Thank you. And with that, I am going to wrap it up. I would like to express my thanks on behalf of the audience. Kirsty's waving at me. Can I mention about the final? Yes, in my wrap-up. I will. First and foremost, I would like to thank our panel of guests. If you could show your appreciation in the usual way, please. Secondly, I'd like to thank every one of you for coming and for staying. I think it's a good sign of the quality of the debate that we've had so many people here and that you are all still here. We do have a football match to get to, so we are